My name is Chris Spruell. I am a senior solutions architect with AWS. I've been with AWS now for almost 4 years, which is about 30 years in AWS time. And it's been a pleasure doing so. I was previously at a small private hosting firm before coming to AWS, specializing in Microsoft and SAP workloads. And before that, I was with SAP for about 15 years. So I know a lot about enterprise software, deployments, migrations into the cloud, and what we're going to be talking about today, which is both hybrid cloud and security. So it's an interesting mashup. I'll be spending about half of my 45 minutes on the security standpoint and half on hybrid. So let's hope that that goes well. What can you expect today? Well, first off, I want you to understand a little bit more about our portfolio, both security and hybrid environments. That being said, we will not have enough time to cover all of that. I'll give you a brief overview of some of the services that are out there. But I want to focus really on those that were most recently announced at our reInvent conference last year. And those are the things that I think we'll be focusing on primarily. Today's agenda is really around security and two of the major announcements that came out at the reInvent conference, the Audit Manager and the Network Firewall. We'll talk about a few additional services that I think merit some discussion and some new and notable features that were also announced there. For hybrid environments, while we do have a large Internet of Things or IoT portfolio, I doubt we're going to have time today to look into those. If we do, I have some additional content that I can share. But we're going to focus mostly on AWS Outpost, Local Zones, and Wavelength, all of which had significant announcements over the course of the past year or at reInvent itself. Keep in mind, there's no need for you to take screenshots of any of this. I will be leaving all of this behind as a PDF so that you will be able to download it and peruse at your leisure. I also have an appendix on here with additional topics, and based on some of the questions that may come in during the course of the presentation, I may add some additional content for you. So we're going to try and tailor it to the additional needs of everybody who's on the call today. So with that, I'm going to go off of video. Let me see how I can do that, like this, I believe. Haha, and now I am the disembodied voice that hopefully everyone will come to know and love. Moving on to security to start us off today. I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about what security responsibilities are within AWS. I'm not assuming that everyone on the call is familiar with working with secure use cases inside of AWS, so I want to start from a very basic level. So one of the most basic things that we discuss with our customer base is this shared responsibility model. AWS has a huge responsibility for the security of the cloud, but our customers also have responsibility in the cloud for workloads that they build atop our services. So when we say we're the security of the cloud in this model, what does that mean? It means that AWS is responsible for protecting all the infrastructure that runs these services that you might use in the AWS cloud. The infrastructure is composed of the hardware, the software, the networking, the facilities. I think of it for our most basic services from the dirt all the way up to the hypervisor level, right? And we are assiduous about this. We say that security is job zero. If we don't provide a secure environment, then we're not doing the right service for our customers. And if we ever see any kind of lack of insecurity or operational excellence, we drop everything so that we remediate that immediately. Now, that being said, you have a responsibility when you build your workloads atop AWS. That could be, for instance, if you're provisioning an Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud instance or an EC2 instance within AWS, and you have to do all the necessary security configuration and manage the tasks that you would as if you had done this on premises as well. Because when you provision an EC2 instance, you choose an operating system that gets deployed thereon. Once that happens, we no longer have visibility into what you're doing within the EC2 instance that above our hypervisor level. So if, for instance, you leave that running for 2 years and never patch it, you've fallen short on your responsibility to keep that secure. If you don't, ubiquitously encrypt all of your data that is being sent over the networks externally, well, that's not something that we can necessarily control. You may have a good reason for doing it, but if that data is sensitive, then you have once again fallen short on your responsibility. So we want to make sure, though, that not only do we advise you of that up front, we also want to give you the tools that you need to manifest the workloads in the most secure fashion possible. So we have a large suite of identity, compliance, and security solutions out there that map to what we call the 5 epics of the security well-architected framework. I provided a link to the security pillar of that framework below. So it covers the gamut from identity and access management, detecting some sort of a security violation or a possible security violation, protecting your infrastructure, protecting your data, and then responding if you suspect something has occurred. We'll focus a lot today on compliance because of one of the announcements, but in each of these cases, there are AWS services that have been provided over time to assist with that. So for instance, if you're trying to do encryption, we have our key management service. If you are looking to protect a web application that's put out there, we've got a web application firewall. You don't necessarily have to use the AWS services for this. We have many partners out there that provide services, appliances within the AWS marketplace, et cetera, that you can provision and use in lieu of these. But our customers give us a lot of feedback about what they'd like to see from an AWS perspective, what they like to see native in our service offerings. And we do about 90% of our development based on that kind of feedback from our customers. So a lot of what you're seeing here are things that customers have asked for. So let's talk about what's new in AWS security. Going back to the feedback that we got from customers, one of the things that we heard was that the risk management processes that had been developed over time for on-premises environments had some problems sometimes when working with a cloud provider, because the speed of innovation and the egalitarian nature of how developers can provision software, hardware, et cetera, within AWS, they really are changing the way that you have to assess your security risk. And so we talked to over 50 customers and found that only about 20% of those were using any form of automation to collect their audit data. And many of the GRC, the governance, risk, and compliance teams, spent over 60% of their time just collecting data. So gathering evidence in a timely manner to support any kind of an audit could be a significant challenge due to all of these manual, error-prone, and sometimes distributed processes. This could be multiple teams, both from an IT perspective and from a business perspective, that had to coordinate their efforts to find out what they actually done and whether they were compliant, both with internal and external regulations. So preparing an audit could cause significant lost productivity. It could be dozens of staff or consultants. It could last weeks. And sometimes applying traditional audit practices were just not going to work for cloud infrastructure. So all you would need to do to gather and verify and synthesize this evidence was happening, again, sometimes in a vacuum. They asked if we might be able to help, and that's where we came up with our latest service from a security standpoint, the AWS Audit Manager. It allows you to continuously audit your AWS usage to simplify how you assess your risk and compliance posture. So it's going to help all of these different teams centralize what they're doing and have a single source of truth from which they can pull the information required for an audit. It offers some pre-built customizable frameworks that we'll go to in a moment and talk about to map the way that AWS usage is going against your compliance controls. Even better, it's going to automate the collection and organization of all of this across all of your AWS accounts within an organization. And it also allows you to delegate and to control who has access to what, to coordinate how these different teams work together to get the information they need to prove that the audit is going to yield a compliant result. And it gives you the assessment reports at the end that show that the integrity exists across your AWS deployments. So how does it get this information? Well, you saw some of the services that I mentioned early on that are in our security suite, and they are the input to the AWS Audit Manager. So one of those is CloudTrail. CloudTrail has a list of all of the different API calls that are occurring within your AWS accounts, and they are being fed into Audit Manager. So something that you might have to comply with could be, say, PCI DSS, which is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. And let's say that you have an EC2 instance with an elastic block storage volume that contains cardholder data. And you need to prove as part of the audit that any type of encryption is one occurring on the EBS volume, and that if you're changing the policy around that encryption, that it's being able to be traced back to who did this and when. So to generate this evidence, Audit Manager would scan the CloudTrail logs, capture the API calls that signified this encryption policy change, and then identify exactly that. The user ID involved, the EBS volumes, when these occur. All of that would now be available to your auditor. Some other services, AWS Config, Security Hub, and License Manager, are input sources for the Audit Manager. So AWS Config is a service that enables you to assess, to audit, and to evaluate all the configurations of your AWS resources. Security Hub gives you a comprehensive view of your security alerts and your security posture across all your AWS accounts, so you don't have to jump from screen to screen to see what your current security posture is and where your alerts are coming from. And AWS License Manager is, as you might expect, something that makes it easier for you to manage your software licenses from some of your many different vendors like Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, or IBM across AWS and even on-premises environment. So for instance, the Security Hub, it monitors your controls for a Center of Internet Security AWS Foundations in Denmark, or what we call the CIS benchmark. One control of that is that you have to have a password policy that requires at least one lowercase letter. And if you were trying to find that, previously you would have to go directly to Security Hub or go to some other logging device to find it. Well, with Audit Manager, it's already collecting that information. You can search and find that what your password policy is. It's already been input from Security Hub, and then you could see evidence for each account that's in scope for that particular type of audit for CIS. Now, you can also manually upload things that are not necessarily automated from a logging standpoint. So for instance, this could be organization charts, written narratives on people's roles, responsibilities in the security space, training records that security training has been completed, documentation of operational procedures, and documentation of your architecture to make it easier for auditors to understand where the information that you're getting from Audit Manager maps to an overall architecture design. So the benefits are self-evident now. You can easily map your AWS usage to your controls. You can use the built-in compliance frameworks that we provide, or build your own custom frameworks to align with whatever your existing internal controls might be. You save time. You can focus on just reviewing the evidence that you have to make sure that your controls are working as you intend them to do. You can be continually prepared to do these audit-ready reports because the evidence is being continuously collected. It's organized by controls, so you can search it, you can filter on it, you can review the evidence, and make sure the controls are working as you mean them to work. And then finally, you can ensure the assessment reports and evidence integrity. That is, when it's time for an audit, you can build assessment reports that show that the data has been continuously collected, securely stored, and it remains unaltered. I mentioned those pre-delivered Audit Manager frameworks, CIS, PCI DSS, and several others that are common throughout multiple industries and industry verticals are available now. If you have feedback on ones you might like to see, if you want to use Audit Manager and don't see some of these, definitely let us know. Because again, we take your feedback, your input as the direction that we want to do the development. We've also supplied some best practices for Amazon S3, Amazon Identity and Access Management, Amazon DynamoDB, so that you can go ahead and use those out of the box. And of course, the software licensing from the License Manager. And then build your own. If there's something that's internal to your business or something that does not necessarily align with an industry standard that's been built in, you can put that in there so that you can have an easy single pane of glass to see what the auditors would need to see to show that the internal audit meets muster. So I'd be remiss if I did not talk about AWS Artifact. For anyone who is doing auditing and needs to see what kind of regulations and attestations AWS is compliant with, AWS Artifact makes that easy. It's a service that's internal to the AWS Management Console. All you would need to do is go to the portal and download the different certificates or attestations that you would need to prove this to your auditor. It really makes it easier when you're doing a third-party audit to say, okay, everything for the services you're using already has, say, SOC 1, 2, and 3 compliance. You don't necessarily have to go to that level anymore. You can now just talk about the workloads that you've built on top of it, knowing that the underpinnings are compliant with those regulations. The big announcement was that there's no longer an NDA requirement. You don't have to have a non-disclosure agreement necessarily with us to get these attestations. You merely have to go through a checklist of and accept the terms and conditions for what it might mean to download and share those. And finally, especially if you're new to auditing your AWS cloud resources, there are some third parties out there who would be more than delighted to assist you in both upskilling or perhaps even conducting the audit itself. I put some links to these here. There's now a Cloud Audit Academy with AWS specific compliance training out there, and a list of third parties who have done many different types of audits within AWS and can either upskill your team, assist with the audit, or perform the audit for you. So let's shift gears here for just a second and go to more of the infrastructure security that you might expect. Not just auditing at a higher level, but now controlling the access to your AWS environment. We introduced the AWS Network Firewall this year. We've always had a built-in firewall capability with our AWS security groups that are a portion of our VPCs or virtual private clouds. For those of you who aren't necessarily familiar with VPCs, it's the service that lets you launch AWS resources in a logically isolated virtual network that you define and that you control. It's the basis really of your segmentation of the cloud within an AWS account. So you have things like you control the IP address range, the subnets, configuration of your route tables, and the network gateways. Well, the security groups were typically only available for a single VPC or subnet. And it could sometimes be a little bit overwhelming to control at that level of granularity. The network firewall alleviates that and allows things to be applied at a more holistic level. It's a managed service that makes it easy to deploy network protections for all your Amazon virtual private clouds. The service can be set up with just a few clicks. It scales automatically within your network, and you don't have to worry about deploying or managing any infrastructure. This doesn't preclude you from using third-party network firewalls, but it does simplify the management of it so that perhaps you don't have to if you're just starting from scratch or don't already have a firewall provider that you prefer. It has a rules engine that lets you define firewall rules that give you very fine-grained control over this network traffic. You can also import rules that you've already written in some common open source rule formats, as well as enable integrations to manage intelligent feeds from our partners. And we'll talk more about which partners in a few minutes. It works together with our AWS Firewall Manager, which I'll talk about in a few slides, so that you can build out these policies based on network firewall rules and then centrally apply those across your VPCs and your accounts. So how would you get started with this? It's fairly easy. First, you would go to the Amazon VPC console and create or import firewall rules. Then you would group those into policies, and then you would apply them to the VPCs that you want to protect. The AWS Network Firewall is reasonably priced. It's based on the number of firewalls deployed and the amount of traffic inspected. As with most AWS services, there are no upfront commitments, and you pay only for what you use. The infrastructure is managed by us, so AWS is managing the infrastructure entirely. It automatically scales as your network traffic scales, and it can support hundreds of thousands of different connections. You don't have to worry about building or maintaining your own network security infrastructure at all. It offers a service level agreement, an SLA, with an uptime commitment of 4 nines, so 99.99% uptime. The throughput performance is better than 45 gigabits per second on a per firewall endpoint basis within an individual availability zone or for any rule type. Now then, what kind of features are out there? There's quite a few. I'll only hit on a couple of these. One, it does have stateless rules and stateful rules. The stateful firewall will take into account the context of any of the traffic flows for more granular policy enforcement. Things like dropping packets based on the source IP address or protocol type. The rule engine gives you the ability to write thousands of firewall rules based on things like source destination IP, port, or protocol. And it will work with common protocols that don't have any port specification, not just TCP or UDP traffic filtering. It supports inbound and outbound web filtering for unencrypted web traffic. For encrypted web traffic, the server name indication, or SNI, is used for blocking access to specific sites. You can also filter fully qualified domain names. It does have intrusion prevention systems available, where they provide active traffic flow inspection with real-time network and application layer protections against vulnerability exploits or brute force attacks. Alert logs are rule specific. They provide additional data regarding the rule that was triggered and the policy session that triggered it. The network firewall flow logs can be natively stored in S3, CloudWatch logs, or Kinesis firewalls. With central management, we'll talk about Firewall Manager in just a moment, but you can also deploy the templates from CloudFormation or Terraform with network firewall components included within or across accounts. And you can use the Resource Access Manager to deploy network firewall across accounts. The Resource Access Manager is another service, and this one enables you to easily and securely share AWS resources with any AWS account or within the AWS organization. So it's not just network firewall, there's other services from a network standpoint, such as transit gateways, subnets, from a security standpoint, your license manager configuration, et cetera. So once again, we're trying to make sure that all of these integrate to make it as easy as possible to get this security posture across your entire account or multiple accounts within your organization. The AWS Network Firewall is compliant, it works very well with AWS partners for integration with certain third-party policy orchestration or exporting logs to analytics solutions. If you see one up there that you're already using, then we already have communication established with that partner. There's a full list at the address on the slide. And it supports existing managed rule providers so that you can use your existing rules and import those well. I mentioned the AWS Firewall Manager earlier. In addition to Network Firewall, it works with several other security-related components. Our AWS Web Application Firewall, which has L7 protection on our API Gateway, AWS Application Load Balancers, and Amazon CloudFront, our content distribution network. AWS Shield Advanced for L3, L4 distributed denial of service protection on CloudFront, our Elastic Load Balancers, Elastic IPs, and our global accelerator services. And the classic security groups for L3, L4 IP filtering on all EC2 instances. The Firewall Manager itself is meant to enable you to centrally deploy and manage these security policies, not only across applications, but across VPCs and all your accounts. So it takes the network firewall rules that you built with the newly announced service and groups those into policies. They can be deployed in conjunction with all of these other different types of policies as well. So the nice thing now is that as new accounts or resources or network components are created by your teams, the Firewall Manager will make it easy to bring them into compliance by enforcing that common set of firewall policies ubiquitously. There's a few more services I wanted to discuss just a little bit because I wanted you to make sure that you saw some of the announcements that came out at reInvent or before on these. One of them is Amazon Guard Duty. You saw earlier that it was a source for your audit manager, but it stands on its own. It's a threat detection service that continuously monitors for malicious activity or any kind of unauthorized behavior to protect your AWS accounts and workloads and data that's stored in Amazon S3, for instance. It uses machine learning, anomaly detection, and integrated threat intelligence to both identify and then prioritize any kind of potential threat. And it can analyze tens of billions of events across multiple AWS data sources, such as the CloudTrail event logs, VPC flow logs, and DNS logs. Some of the recently announced Improvements include the enhanced threat detections across all of these with improved machine learning, improved anomaly detection. It now has support across AWS organizations, so you can delegate an administrative account that can be the controller for all guard duty across your whole organization and manage all accounts in that region. And if you're new to guard duty or just starting to use it for the first time, it enables S3 protections by default. If you're already using guard duty, you'll still need to go in and enable those yourself, but otherwise they come in de facto once you begin using guard duty within or across accounts. Those S3 protections match up against Amazon Macie. So these are things that Macie has done for a while. If you're not familiar with Macie, it's a fully managed data security and data privacy service that uses machine learning and pattern matching, again, to discover, protect sensitive data that's stored in your S3 buckets. So it can detect sensitive data types like PII, or personally identifiable information, things like names, addresses, credit card numbers, or you can even define your own sensitive data types in a custom fashion, so you can discover and protect the data that might be unique to your vertical, your industry, your business itself. It provides multi-account support natively, so you can see your entire data security posture across all of your S3 buckets from a single Macie administrator account. And that multi-account support is within AWS organizations. So all you have to do is enable Macie across all of your accounts and be able to take advantage of this across the board. Another nice thing over the course of the past year, there was an 80% price drop in Macie and a redesign of the interface screen. So you really get a single pane of glass into what's going on across your S3 data security. And finally, I wanted to mention the AWS Security Hub. You see within here, there are a lot of the services we've already talked about that are feeding into it. The Security Hub gives you the comprehensive view of what's going on in your AWS account. So any security alerts, what your overall security posture is, taking in the information from these other services, and ultimately providing it to the AWS Audit Manager. This keeps your security team from switching back and forth between any number of different tools to deal with however many security alerts you get in every day. Sometimes that could be up to thousands. So it's nice to have everything in a single place. It aggregates, organizes, and prioritizes all the security alerts from services like Guard Duty, Macie, IAM, so the Identity and Access Management, Access Analyzer, your Systems Manager, and Firewall Manager. So if you're using those other services, the Security Hub is going to be the visibility improvement that you might need on your security team for how you're doing from a security standpoint. Now, there were a lot of other announcements. I have some of those in the appendix here, but also links to them. So if you want to get more in depth than I'm able to go in this short presentation today, this will be provided to you afterwards. We also have quite a few blogs that allow you to see step-by-step instructions on how to get started, or to go, once again, more in depth into what the service can do, and perhaps even include some code that will allow you to deploy this if you don't want to spend your time doing so in the console. All right.
Hey, Chris,
Yeah,
one other thing on the security, if people have questions in your business, in your infrastructure, you can email me. I'll make sure that Chris brings in the right experts to figure out, okay, I've got this infrastructure, I've got these regulatory concerns, how does it work? Just email me those specific questions that we'll probably take in offline. We've got about 20 minutes now to go through AWS Hybrid.
Indeed. So far, so good on timing. So AWS Hybrid offers, what do we have here? First things first, what is hybrid? Back in the day, we discussed hybrid really as a dichotomous solution. You were either within AWS cloud, right? Or you were in an on-premises data center. And never the twain would meet. We often were talking specifically about moving workloads from on-premises to AWS so that they could take advantage of our 24 different regions or 77 availability zones, all of our points of presence or edge locations that are out there. Really, the cost benefits, the speed benefits, the agility benefits of running in the cloud. But we also understand that in some cases, not only can this transition take some time, but there may still be workloads that need to remain on premise to be close to something else. In some cases, this could be like a metro data center, right? You may want a smaller local data center when proximity to your customers, or perhaps data residency within a certain country or a certain region was required, where we may not yet have an AWS region. You may have to run in a disconnected fashion. So a rugged edge type device where you would perhaps run on a ship, a cruise ship, or in an airplane, or in the trunk of a car, something like that, where you can't count on ubiquitous internet connectivity, or you can't count on it staying within certain, say, temperature or vibration norms that you would need for typical compute. Perhaps you're doing some sort of a mobile device connecting without any kind of a wire to perhaps the new 5G edge connectivity that would allow for sub-millisecond latency. And of course, we have a lot of discussions around networked environments such as manufacturing facilities, or using microcontrollers and Internet of Things devices in homes, factories, automotives, all over the place. So hybrid really is not just on premises or and bridged to AWS. It can cover all of these different solutions. And we have solutions that we previously announced that map to all of them, right? So again, we think that our customers are almost always well suited to running in AWS. We have 24 regions with 6 more announced coming soon. So we're continuing to expand our global footprint. And for those of you who are not familiar, a region is a location where we cluster data centers. And within each region, there are at least 2, and usually 3 or more, availability zones, which are 1 or more data centers that are connected within the region by high bandwidth network cabling and distributed across fault zones, floodplains, et cetera, to provide resiliency within that region. But again, we also are offering a few other options for running in different modes, not just running in traditional AWS cloud fashion. And there were quite a few announcements this past year that support that. So we'll go into some of those in just a moment. Now, as I mentioned, I don't know that I'm going to have time to go over the IoT components today, but I will have some information in the appendix that will be included afterwards that Ron and his team will be sending out. So you will have information there. And I've also got a link to some additional announcements at the end of this. If you're going to be sticking around for some of the other sessions today, you may hear some discussion of Amazon Monitron and Panorama, which are hybrid solutions in the machine learning and artificial intelligence space. So I imagine those will be addressed there. And if you're going to be discussing, or learning from our folks who are discussing the containers and microservices, we also have an offering that is going to allow hybrid capabilities around our Elastic Container Service and our Elastic Kubernetes Service. But with that, I'd like to discuss 3 hybrid options that are pretty exciting. So first, the AWS Outposts, which is for on-premises workloads and resources. AWS Local Zones, which are for end users and resources that aren't on premises, but maybe in a particular geographic area that you want to be closer to where we don't yet have a region. And AWS Wavelength. So if you want to be able to use the 5G networks for mobile connectivity and connected devices, this may be what you're looking for. So first off, let's start with AWS Outposts. And basically, this is the same AWS infrastructure that we're running internally in our regions, but in your on-premises location. So we announced these back at reInvent in 2019, and they went generally available this year, 2020. And now AWS Outposts is a fully managed service that extends the infrastructure, the services, all of the APIs, all the tools that AWS developers are familiar with to virtually any location. So data center, co-location space, or an on-premises facility. So you get this truly hybrid experience. It's really good for workloads that need low latency access to your on-premises applications or systems. Local data processing, secure storage of sensitive customer data that needs to remain somewhere where there is no AWS region right now. And this could be including being inside company-controlled environments or specific countries. So let's not click on that. If I don't do it wrong at least one time during a presentation, it's really not a presentation I'm doing. in AWS data centers, it's built on top of what we call the Nitro system. The Nitro system is our virtualization infrastructure underlying our current generation of EC2 instances. And it's allowed us to really speed up our innovation cycles by breaking apart the CPU, the storage, the networking, and the management capabilities so that we can innovate on different parts of that. We put that same technology into the AWS Outposts, which means that we're going to be able to innovate faster, both in AWS Cloud proper and for our customers who need on-premises processing. We've already expanded to 51 countries and all the commercial and AWS GovCloud regions for use of Outposts today. And we make it easy to migrate workloads to or from the Outpost through a single management plane. So basically the same thing that you would be doing in the management console within AWS for your region-based services, you would be doing for your on-premises workloads as well. Now, we've launched a lot of new features and services and Outposts over the course of the past years also. It was initially going to be just the EC2 and EBS instances at start. You were going to have an application load balancer capability, local monitoring, compliance certs that you can always go and find out on AWS Artifact, and improved network performance. But we also came out with the ability to run RDS, our managed database offering. So relational database service is what that stands for. And running Amazon S3, our simple storage service at the edge for, once again, when you need object storage within a certain location that doesn't necessarily correspond with regions that we've already built up. We announced the use of our Elastic Container Service, and now, most recently, the use of Elasticache and our Elastic Kubernetes service on the AWS Outposts. So those are our announcements that came out in and around the reInvent timeframe. We also pre-announced that Outpost is coming in 2 new sizes. The Outpost itself is a full rack. It's about 80 inches tall. It takes up a certain amount of space. Not every customer either has that space available or needs that much compute storage power. So we took that upon ourselves, once again, from the feedback that they had provided, to say, okay, we'll do the same type of services, infrastructure, APIs, and tools, but now with a smaller form factor. So we're going to be offering a 1U Outpost using the AWS Graviton2 processor. And that's a processor that we developed internally at AWS that can provide a 40% price performance improvement over similarly sized EC2 instances that have Intel-based processors. But if you prefer an Intel-based processor, we're going to have a 2U Outpost server with one of those included. Intel processors, once again, can run pretty much any kind of workload. Graviton2 processors, not all would be well suited for that. Love to have that conversation with you offline if you're interested in learning more about it. But once again, those will be coming in 2021 for your on-premises use cases. They already exist quite a bit within our cloud-based services. Again, ideal for workloads that require low latency or local processing, but you don't need the full-size Outposts. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up an old friend of mine, the AWS Snow Family. So what you see pictured here is a snowball edge and a snow cone. If you can't count on constant network connectivity for your compute and storage, or if this is some place that you might need a ruggedized device, if it's sitting out on a manufacturing shop floor gathering data or providing some sort of machine learning inference for a manufacturing processing use case, this might be a better use for a Snow Family. They're different sizes, and both are, though, hardware appliances that you can bring to that disconnected edge. It stores data that's running off different assets that you have. It has compute. You can do some analytics and processing, but then at any point, if you actually want to detach the appliance and send it back to us to have us ingest the data in our data centers, that was the initial use case for a Snowball. We've continued to expand that with various different types of compute and storage offerings in the Snow Family, and you can look for more to come. But again, this one may be better if you cannot have ubiquitous connectivity for the internet, which is something that is required at a certain minimum bandwidth for an AWS Outpost. Shifting gears a little bit, AWS Local Zones. If you want to run latency sensitive applications, but you don't want to put hardware in an on-premises environment, this may be your option. Maybe you don't need the extreme low latency of a LAN, but you're still okay with sub-millisecond in a metro environment. So this is AWS infrastructure deployments that place AWS compute, storage, database, other select services closer to a large population or an industry or IT centers where no AWS region exists today. They're fully managed by us, so AWS is going to take care of all of the management. And you can think of them really as an availability zone that's just closer to a large metro data center, a large metro center, I should say. Now, local zones extend these AWS infrastructure services, a subset of them at least, with the familiar APIs and tools that you've come to know and love where you need it, and run latency sensitive applications. Now, there's a lot of different potential use cases for this. And again, down to the single digit millisecond latency for your end users. And they could include things like in media and entertainment content creation, where you're doing live production, video editing, or some sort of graphics intensive artist workstations. This would be good for that. Multiplayer gaming, where the developers need to deploy these latency sensitive game servers in local zones so that you can run real-time multiplayer game sessions and maintain reliable gameplay experience because of that low latency. Enterprise migration, something near and dear to my heart, which is perhaps you have an SAP system or another large enterprise mission critical system that you do want to migrate to AWS, but at least initially you can't handle the latency to the nearest region. You could migrate into the local zone and then asynchronously migrate to the region of your choosing later on. It allows that complex legacy on-premises applications to incrementally move. There's also the similar machine learning inference use cases, live video streaming, and augmented reality, virtual reality use cases that you could see with AWS Outposts. They would also be good use cases for AWS local zones. So currently this is in preview in Boston, Houston, and Miami. There's 12 more local zones that are expected in 2021 that were announced, including my hometown of Atlanta, Chicago, and New York. And it supports a subset of the AWS services that you see here: EC2, ECS, EKS, VPC, and EBS, at least at launch. And it's all about that low latency within the certain locations. Our goal ultimately is to have single-digit millisecond latency to the vast majority of any user in the continental United States. But if you're looking for another innovation that allows low latency connection without wires, that's where you might want to look at AWS Wavelength. So let me read the slide. Latency sensitive applications at the 5G edge using AWS infrastructure and services. It's optimized for mobile edge computing services. So it's going to extend the AWS infrastructure to the 5G networks. It'll be, once again, a single pane of management in cloud, providing the same APIs and tools as our AWS region and making it very easy to deploy from the AWS regions to whatever needs to run in the 5G enabled edge location. So the Wavelength places the AWS infrastructure at the network edge to eliminate the extra network hops and to make all of this easy to manage for anyone who's developing something that requires that kind of low latency over a 5G network. So this became generally available back in August with Verizon. And we have we have 8 different wavelength zones in the US now with the addition of Las Vegas. We also have partnerships with KDDI in Tokyo in Japan and SK Telecom in Korea that have gone live as well. And we're looking to bring Wavelength to Europe with Vodafone in the first quarter of this year. And it's a huge investment area for us. And there's been lots of discussion of different use cases around things like connected vehicles, interactive high-res live video streams to mobile devices. Again, AR, VR is another one. Smart factories, where they might be using sensors enabled with 5G, 5G-enabled robotic forklifts, ML inference on 5G-enabled devices, even ML-assisted diagnostics healthcare on 5G-enabled devices in hospitals. So that's another exciting avenue that we are exploring in the hybrid environment. Now, how do we do this? So basically what happens is that we have AWS infrastructure located and installed at a physical site that's part of the communication service provider's network, or CSP's network. So the CSP network has a physical location such as a cell tower that connects with what we call traffic aggregation points at metro levels. So these wavelength zones that I discussed, the 8 in the US and the 2 overseas, are installed at the aggregation site. The 5G access network is directly connected to the wavelength zone through a construct that we call the carrier gateway. It allows mobile devices to access the instances in the wavelength zone without having to go to the internet. So the wavelength zones are managed and monitored by AWS and connect over high bandwidth links to the nearest AWS region. The applications that run in the wavelength zone can use our core services like EC2, EBS, ECS, EKS that have been mentioned for these other hybrid scenarios within that location, but they can also connect seamlessly back to other services like DynamoDB, like Amazon S3, et cetera, that are in the AWS region to rapidly pass information back and forth. So you would then deploy like a portion of your cloud-based application that requires that ultra-low millisecond latency to wavelength, and then connect seamlessly back to the rest of the application and services that are running in AWS that can handle a little more latency. And again, you're going to get a consistent developer experience across all the different 5G networks around the world with which we're partnering, allowing you to build these low latency applications with the same familiar AWS services, the same APIs, and the same tools that you're already using and building with today. Again, the announcements were the new zones that are coming out. We intend on expanding even further over the course of the next year. And if you have some input on where you might like to see a wavelength zone, or if you're interested in wavelength zones, by all means, reach out to me.